Daniel Reed never imagined that a routine visit to one of his stores would change everything. As the CEO of Reed Mart, a fast-growing convenience store chain, he had built his business from the ground up. But as success grew, so did his distance from the employees and customers who made it all possible. Reports and financial statements told him that things were running smoothly. But were they really? Determined to see the truth for himself, Daniel went undercover. Dressed in old jeans, a hoodie, and a baseball cap, he walked into one of his busiest stores, blending in as a temporary worker. His plan was simple: observe, listen, and find out what really happens behind the register. But what he overheard near the checkout counter that afternoon stopped him cold. A cashier, just a young guy, was speaking in hushed tones to an elderly man. "Don't worry about the total today, Mr. Bennett. It's on me." Daniel froze in disbelief. Why would an employee pay out of his own pocket for a customer? Was this a one-time act of kindness or something more? He had no idea that this moment would lead to one of the biggest decisions of his life. Daniel Reed never imagined he would feel like a stranger in his own company. At 47, he was the CEO of Reed Mart, one of the fastest-growing convenience store chains in the country. To most, he was the embodiment of success, a self-made entrepreneur who had turned a single neighborhood store into a thriving empire with over 150 locations. On paper, his life was perfect. He had wealth, recognition, and a legacy that would outlive him. But in the quiet moments when the meetings ended and the office emptied, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He remembered the early days when Reed Mart was just a single store on a quiet street. Back then, he knew every customer who walked in. He stocked the shelves himself, worked the register, and even swept the floors before locking up at night. His employees weren't just workers. They were people with names, families, and dreams. He cared about them, and they cared about the company. That's what made Reed Mart special. But as the years passed and more stores opened, things began to change. Expansion required structure, systems, and management layers that pushed him further from the front lines. He still visited stores occasionally, but it was different. Employees saw him as the boss, someone to impress, someone to fear, not someone they could talk to. The warmth he had once felt in his stores was fading, replaced by efficiency and corporate policies. Lately, he had been hearing murmurs that made his unease grow stronger. Employees complaining about store managers who treated them like machines. Customers who felt the service was declining. Reports of high turnover rates and staff feeling undervalued. His executives dismissed the concerns, pointing at rising sales and growing profits. "Everything's fine," they told him. But Daniel had built this company on instinct, and his instinct told him otherwise. One evening, he sat alone in his office, staring at a spreadsheet filled with numbers, profit margins, customer retention rates, and employee efficiency scores. None of them answered the real question. Were his employees happy? Did they still believe in the company the way he once had? He thought back to his first job as a teenage grocery store bagger. He had watched an old cashier named Frank pay for a struggling customer's groceries out of his own pocket, expecting nothing in return. That single act of kindness had shaped the way Daniel thought about business. It wasn't just about selling products, it was about people. That's when the idea struck him. It was reckless, it was unusual. And yet, the more he considered it, the more it made sense. What if he went back to the front lines? What if he became one of his own employees, walked among them, listened to their struggles, and saw the company from their perspective? Not as Daniel Reed, the CEO, but as an ordinary worker. The idea sent a thrill through him. He could visit his stores 100 times in a suit and still never know the truth. But if he stepped into their world, saw things with his own eyes, he could find out what was really happening inside Reed Mart. By morning, he had made up his mind. He wouldn't just observe, he would become one of them. He needed to disappear into the background, blend in so well that no one would suspect who he really was. That afternoon, he stood in front of a mirror, examining his transformation. His normally clean-shaven face was covered in a rough beard. His tailored suits had been replaced with an old hoodie and worn-out jeans. A baseball cap covered his neatly combed hair, and a pair of thick-rimmed glasses disguised his sharp features. He looked nothing like the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. He looked like an ordinary guy searching for a job. He had chosen store number 32, a busy downtown location known for its high performance and demanding workload. Employees worked long hours, and while customers kept the place profitable, there were mixed reviews about management. Some employees thrived, but others left quickly, citing burnout and pressure. It was the perfect place to begin his undercover mission. As he stepped into the store that morning, a strange sense of nostalgia washed over him. The smell of fresh coffee brewing near the front, the hum of conversations between customers and cashiers, the distant beep of barcodes being scanned. It all felt familiar and distant at the same time. He walked up to the manager's desk, holding a slightly crumpled employment form. The woman behind the desk barely looked up before muttering, "You must be Mike Dawson, the temp worker from headquarters." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, that's me. Just here to help out." The manager, Lisa, was in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and an air of exhaustion that suggested she had little patience for nonsense. She glanced at him briefly, then motioned toward the back. "Stock room's that way. We're short-handed, so you'll be restocking shelves most of the day. Stay out of the way of the registers." That was fine with him. He wasn't here to draw attention. He was here to observe. As he made his way toward the aisles, he let his eyes wander over the employees at work. Some moved quickly, heads down, focused only on their tasks. Others moved sluggishly, their faces expressionless. Then his eyes landed on one cashier who was different. A young man, probably in his early 20s, stood behind the register. But unlike the other employees who worked with quiet detachment, this one was engaged. He greeted every customer with a smile, chatting with them like they were old friends. He asked about their kids, remembered their usual orders, and even cracked jokes that made people laugh. Daniel found himself lingering nearby, pretending to organize a display shelf while he listened. The cashier's name tag read Jake. Jake wasn't just doing his job, he was making people's day better. Daniel watched as a frail elderly man approached Jake's register with a small loaf of bread and a carton of milk. The man dug into his pockets with trembling hands, pulling out a handful of coins and wrinkled bills. Daniel saw it before it happened. The man was short on money. The line behind him grew longer as the old man counted again, his face tightening in frustration. I think I'm a little short." Jake didn't hesitate. He reached into his own pocket, pulled out a few dollars, and quietly handed them over to the register. "Don't worry about it, Mr. Bennett. This one's on me." The elderly man looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "Jake, I can't keep letting you do this. You'll get in trouble." Jake just smiled and whispered, "It's fine, Mr. Bennett. You've taken care of so many people in your life. Let someone take care of you." Daniel's hands froze mid-motion. He had spent years analyzing employee performance, creating policies, and optimizing operations for maximum efficiency. But no policy in the world could explain what he had just witnessed. Why would an employee, who probably wasn't making much himself, use his own money to help a customer? Was this a one-time act of kindness? Or was it something more? For the first time in a long time, Daniel wasn't looking at spreadsheets or business reports. He was looking at something real, and he had to know more. Daniel Reed had always been the face of Reedmart. His name appeared on every corporate document, his face had been featured in business magazines, and he was well known in executive circles. But now, he needed to become invisible. He was not just making a routine visit to one of his stores. He was stepping into a world where no one should recognize him. He had to move among his employees as one of them, to experience their challenges firsthand and uncover the truth about what was really happening inside Reedmart. His reflection in the mirror was already unrecognizable. The well-groomed, sharp-dressed chief executive officer had vanished. Instead, staring back at him was someone entirely different. His perfectly styled hair was now hidden beneath a faded baseball cap. A scruffy beard covered his jawline, a stark contrast to his usual clean-shaven face. He had swapped his tailored suits for a worn-out hoodie and faded jeans, the kind of clothes that blended in anywhere. To finish the disguise, he slid on a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. It felt strange to see himself like this, but it was necessary. If he walked into one of his own stores looking like the chief executive officer, employees would adjust their behavior. They would smile more, work harder, and treat customers with extra care because they knew the boss was watching. But Daniel did not want special treatment. He wanted to see the reality of his company, not a performance. After scanning through a list of locations, he selected a store that seemed like the perfect choice. Store number 32, located in a busy downtown area. It was one of the company's highest-performing locations, yet something about it concerned him. Employee reviews were mixed. Some praised the work environment, while others complained of feeling overworked and unappreciated. There had been reports of high turnover, but sales numbers remained strong. Something was not adding up. Arriving at the store that morning, Daniel felt an odd mix of nerves and excitement. It had been years since he had done a regular shift inside a Reed Mart store. Back then, he had known every aspect of the job, from stocking shelves to handling difficult customers. Now, he would be stepping into that world again, but this time as a stranger. He walked inside and approached the manager's desk, holding a slightly wrinkled employment form. Lisa, the store manager, barely glanced up. "You must be Mike Dawson, the temporary worker from headquarters," she muttered, distracted by the computer screen in front of her. Daniel nodded. "Yes, that is me." Lisa gave a quick glance at his appearance and let out a small sigh. "All right, Mike, we are short-staffed today, so you will be on stocking duty. Stay out of the way of the registers and do not cause any problems." She did not ask about his experience. She did not welcome him to the team. It was clear she saw temporary workers as disposable. Daniel had expected a more structured onboarding process, but he was not here to complain. He simply nodded and followed her instructions. Walking toward the back of the store, he took in everything around him. Customers moved through the aisles, some browsing casually, others in a hurry to grab their items and leave. Employees worked in quiet efficiency, their faces unreadable. Some of them looked engaged in their work, while others looked exhausted, as if they were just trying to get through the day. Then he spotted someone different. A young cashier at the front of the store stood out from the rest. Unlike the others who seemed focused solely on their tasks, this young man was engaged. Really engaged. He greeted every customer warmly, remembered their names, and asked about their families. He even made small jokes, drawing smiles from people as they checked out. Daniel found himself lingering nearby, pretending to arrange a display shelf while he listened. The cashier's name tag read Jake. Something about the way Jake interacted with people caught Daniel's attention. It was not just customer service. It was genuine care. He was not just ringing up orders. He was connecting with the people in front of him. Daniel watched as an elderly man approached Jake's register, placing a loaf of bread and a small carton of milk on the counter. The man's hands shook slightly as he pulled out his wallet and started counting out bills and coins. The total appeared on the screen. The man hesitated. He counted again, his face tightening in frustration. I think I am a little short," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake glanced at the line of waiting customers but did not rush him. Instead, he reached into his own pocket, pulled out a few dollars, and quietly handed them over. "Do not worry about it, Mr. Bennett," Jake said softly. "This one is on me." The elderly man looked up in surprise, his eyes filled with emotion. "Jake, I cannot keep letting you do this. You will get in trouble." Jake simply smiled. "It is fine, Mr. Bennett. You have taken care of so many people in your life. Let someone take care of you." Daniel's hands froze mid-motion as he adjusted a box of canned goods on the shelf. He had spent years analyzing employee performance, developing policies, and refining business strategies. He had studied customer retention, employee engagement, and company culture. But nothing in a report could explain what he had just witnessed. This was not company policy. This was not some customer service strategy. This was something real. And Daniel had to know more. Daniel could not shake the conversation he had with Bill. Jake had been through more hardship than most people could imagine, yet he still showed up every day with a smile, ready to make life a little easier for those around him. The more Daniel thought about it, the more it bothered him. How many people like Jake had worked at Reedmart over the years? Hard-working, compassionate individuals who were never recognized, never appreciated, just expected to keep giving and giving without anything in return. That night, as he lay in bed, he realized something unsettling. For years, he had built Reedmart as a business first, ensuring efficiency, profit, and expansion. But what about the people? Had he unintentionally created a company where employees like Jake were overlooked and undervalued? The thought kept him awake for hours. By morning, he had made up his mind. He was going to keep digging, and this time, he would talk to more employees, learn what it was really like to work in one of his stores. Daniel arrived early, grabbing an apron and pretending to prepare for his shift. He moved through the aisles, keeping an ear open to conversations between employees. Some were casual, others were frustrated, and a few were just exhausted. "I swear, if I get called in on my day off again, I am quitting," one employee muttered under her breath as she unloaded a box of canned goods. Another nodded, rubbing his neck. "Yeah, man, same here. Ever since Mark left, it has been a mess. They just expect us to pick up the slack, but we are still getting paid the same." Daniel frowned. He had read reports about staff shortages, but he had never realized just how deeply it was affecting morale. Later that afternoon, as he was wiping down shelves near the back of the store, he overheard a conversation between two employees near the break room door. "I do not get why Jake keeps helping people like that," one said. "I mean, it is nice and all, but it is not like the company is paying him extra for it." The other scoffed. "Yeah, well, that is Jake for you. He actually cares." The first one shook his head. "It is a nice idea, but what does it get him? He is barely making enough to cover his rent. He should be saving that money for himself, not giving it away." Daniel clenched his jaw. It was not right that someone like Jake, who embodied everything Reedmart should stand for, was struggling just to survive. And he was starting to realize that maybe the problem was not just this store. Maybe it was the entire system. During his lunch break, Daniel sat across from Bill again, sipping a cup of stale coffee from the vending machine. "Be honest with me," Daniel said, keeping up his disguise. "Do people actually like working here?" Bill raised an eyebrow. "Depends on who you ask." Daniel frowned. "What about you?" Bill chuckled. "I have been here too long to care. But if you are asking about the younger folks, most of them do not stick around. They get burned out. The pay is okay, but not enough to make a real living. And managers? Some are great, but others—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Like Lisa?" Daniel asked carefully. Bill smirked. "Lisa is not the worst, but she is not exactly the best either. She runs the store like a machine, cares more about numbers than people. If an employee has an issue, her solution is work harder." Daniel's stomach sank. This was his company. His name was on every employee's paycheck. Yet here he was, hearing that people felt undervalued, exhausted, and unappreciated. And then there was Jake, an employee who deserved better but had never been given an opportunity to move up. That realization hit Daniel hard. He had spent years chasing growth, focusing on expansion, ensuring profits rose, but at what cost? Had he built a company where good people went unnoticed? Where employees like Jake, who should be leading stores, training teams, and mentoring new hires, were instead stuck struggling to get by. He needed to make a change. Now, that evening, as the store prepared to close, Daniel made a decision. After the last customer left and the employees began their final cleanup tasks, he removed his apron and walked toward the front of the store. Lisa was in her office working through the day's paperwork, barely glancing up when he knocked on the door. "What do you need, Mike?" she asked, distracted. Daniel took a deep breath, then stepped inside. "We need to have a staff meeting," he said firmly. Lisa looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because," Daniel said, pulling off his glasses, "I am not Mike Dawson." Lisa's face froze as she stared at him, confusion turning into realization. Daniel removed his baseball cap, revealing his true identity. "I am Daniel Reed," he said, "and I have been working undercover in this store for the past 3 days." The room went silent. One by one, employees stopped what they were doing as the news spread across the store. Jake, who had just finished wiping down the counters, froze mid-motion, his eyes widening in disbelief. Lisa stood abruptly, clearly flustered. "Wait, you are telling me you are the—" "Yes," Daniel said, his voice steady. "I own Reed Mart." A heavy silence filled the store. Employees exchanged shocked glances, some looking nervous, others just stunned. Jake's expression was unreadable, but Daniel could see the gears turning in his mind, as if he was replaying every conversation they had had over the past few days. "I came here to see what is really happening in my stores," Daniel continued, "not through reports, not through management updates, but through real experiences, through the eyes of my employees." Lisa's face turned pale. Daniel turned toward Jake. "And Jake," he said, "what I found is you." Jake swallowed hard but remained silent. Daniel took a deep breath before speaking again. "You represent everything Reed Mart should be about. Not just making sales, not just keeping the store running, but caring for the people who walk through those doors." Jake's hands tightened into fists at his sides as if he was trying to process everything. "I watched you help customers, not because it was your job, but because it was the right thing to do," Daniel said. "I saw you cover people's bills out of your own paycheck. I saw you treat every person in this store with dignity and kindness, and I also saw that despite all of that, you have been overlooked." Jake opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly at a loss for words. Daniel continued, his voice filled with determination. "That changes today." The room was so silent that the hum of the refrigerators in the back could be heard. "I am promoting you," Daniel said, effective immediately. Jake's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" "You are going to be the new assistant manager of this store," Daniel said, "and that is just the beginning." Jake stared at him, speechless. Daniel turned to the rest of the staff. "And I am not stopping there. Starting next week, I will be making major changes to how we treat our employees. Pay raises, leadership training programs, better working conditions, because this company is not just about profits, it is about people." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Jake smiled. It was not just a smile of gratitude. It was a smile of disbelief. A smile that said he had finally been seen. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he was doing the right thing. Not as a CEO, but as a leader. The silence in the store lingered for a moment longer, thick with disbelief and anticipation. Every employee stood frozen, their eyes bouncing between Daniel and Jake, as if struggling to grasp what had just happened. The realization that the man they had been working alongside for the past few days was not just another temp worker, but the CEO of Reed Mart himself, sent a shockwave through the room. Jake, still standing behind the register, looked completely stunned. His fingers gripped the counter as if anchoring himself in reality. His mouth opened slightly, then closed as if words had failed him. Lisa, the manager, finally broke the silence. "This has to be some kind of joke," she muttered, her voice laced with uncertainty. "It is not," Daniel said, turning his sharp gaze toward her. "I came here because I wanted to see firsthand what my employees experience. I needed to know what was happening inside my own company. And what I found," he gestured toward Jake, "was someone who embodies the heart of what Reedmart should be." Jake shook his head slightly, his expression unreadable. I don't know what to say." Daniel took a step closer. "Say yes to the promotion," he said. "Say yes to being recognized for the leader you already are." Jake let out a small, disbelieving chuckle. "You're serious?" "As serious as I have ever been." The room remained eerily quiet, as if no one dared to breathe. Jake exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I appreciate it," he said hesitantly, "but I do not do any of that for recognition. I just try to help where I can." "That is exactly why you deserve it," Daniel replied without hesitation. "You do not just work for a paycheck. You care. And that kind of leadership is what we need more of in this company." Jake's eyes searched Daniel's face, looking for any sign that this was some kind of elaborate joke, but all he saw was sincerity. Lisa, still trying to regain control of the situation, cleared her throat. "With all due respect, sir, promoting someone just because they what, Lisa?" Daniel cut her off. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Because they care? Because they go above and beyond without expecting anything in return?" He took a slow step forward, his gaze unwavering. "Tell me, Lisa, how many times have you acknowledged Jake for what he does? How many times have you thanked him for treating customers like people, not just transactions?" Lisa's mouth opened, but no words came out. Daniel nodded as if he had expected her silence. "That is what I thought." He let out a slow breath, then turned his focus back to Jake. "This company needs people like you in leadership positions. People who understand that success is not just about numbers, it is about people." Jake remained still for another moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll do it." The tension in the room broke like a wave crashing onto the shore. The employees, who had been standing stiffly, finally exhaled, exchanging glances of surprise and quiet approval. A slow clap came from the back of the store. Bill, the older stockroom worker, smirked as he crossed his arms. "About damn time someone recognized that kid," he said. A ripple of agreement passed through the staff, and suddenly the room felt different, lighter, hopeful, as if a shift had just occurred that none of them had seen coming. Jake still looked like he was trying to process everything. "So, what happens now?" Daniel smiled. "Now, we make things right." The next morning, Daniel was back in his corporate office, but for the first time in years, he did not feel like he was drowning in spreadsheets and profit reports. Instead, he was filled with a renewed sense of purpose. He sat at his desk, looking over the notes he had taken during his undercover experience. It was not just about Jake. It was about all of his employees, the ones who worked tirelessly, the ones who felt unseen, the ones who made Reedmart run but never got credit for it. He tapped his pen against the desk, then reached for his phone. "Get me the head of HR," he said to his assistant, "and the training department. We are making some changes." Within a week, Reedmart employees across the country began to notice differences. Store managers were required to undergo leadership training, not just on efficiency, but on employee morale, respect, and recognizing hard work. A new employee kindness fund was established, a pool of money available to employees who wanted to help struggling customers without using their own paychecks. It was modeled after what Jake had been doing on his own, ensuring that employees could continue acts of kindness without worrying about financial repercussions. Raises were introduced for long-term employees, and a new mentorship program was created, pairing senior employees with newer hires to foster a sense of community within each store. And at the center of it all? Jake. As promised, he became the assistant manager of store number 32, but that was only the beginning. He was soon invited to headquarters to share his experiences, working directly with corporate leadership to help design better customer service policies and employee appreciation initiatives. Jake had gone from an unnoticed cashier to a company leader simply because someone had finally seen his worth. Months later, Daniel stood outside store number 32, watching as customers came and went. The atmosphere inside the store felt different now, warmer, more inviting. Employees laughed, chatted, and moved through their shifts with energy. Jake stood near the front, giving a friendly wave to an elderly customer as she walked out with her groceries. Daniel smiled to himself. This was what he had wanted Reed Mart to be all along. Not just a business, not just another store, but a place where people mattered. As he turned to leave, he heard a familiar voice call out, "Hey, Mike!" Daniel turned, surprised to see Jake walking toward him with a smirk. "Or should I say, Mr. Reed?" Daniel chuckled. "I think you have earned the right to call me Daniel." Jake crossed his arms. "So, do I get to know the real reason you came to my store in the first place?" Daniel thought about it for a moment. "I came because I wanted to find out if Reed Mart was still the company I had built, if it still stood for the things I believed in." Jake raised an eyebrow. "And did you get your answer?" Daniel nodded. "I did, and it turns out I had been looking in the wrong place. The heart of Reed Mart is not in the corporate office. It is here." He gestured toward the store. "With people like you." Jake exhaled, shaking his head with a small smile. "You know, I never expected any of this." Daniel met his gaze. "Neither did I." There was a pause before Jake chuckled. "Well, if you ever want to come back and stock some shelves, I can always put in a request for another temp worker." Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "I think I will leave that to the professionals." As he walked back toward his car, Daniel felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of peace. Reed Mart was not just a company. It was a family, and as long as he was in charge, he would never lose sight of that again. As Daniel walked away from the store, a cool breeze brushed against his face. He inhaled deeply, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For years, he had built his company with the belief that good business meant good numbers. But after spending just a few days undercover, he realized that the true success of Reed Mart was not in the profit margins or quarterly reports. It was in the people. The next few months were unlike anything the company had seen before. The changes Daniel had initiated were no longer just ideas floating around in corporate meetings. They were becoming a reality. Employees across multiple locations began to feel the shift. Raises were implemented for long-term employees. Schedules were adjusted to prevent overworking. Managers received leadership training that emphasized not just efficiency, but empathy. There was a renewed focus on treating employees as assets rather than just numbers on a payroll. One of the biggest initiatives was the Employee Kindness Fund, inspired by Jake's generosity. It was designed to allow employees to help struggling customers in small but meaningful ways without having to use their own money. If a customer was short on change, if a parent needed baby formula but could not afford it, or if someone simply needed a warm meal, employees could cover small costs using the fund, without fear of getting in trouble. At first, some employees hesitated, unsure if this was real, but after seeing their managers support it, they slowly began to embrace the change. Reed Mart was transforming. Daniel had received countless emails from store managers, some skeptical, some excited. Many were surprised at how quickly morale had improved once employees felt seen, valued, and appreciated. He had spent years assuming that people worked hard when they were given the right incentives. What he had not considered was that people worked even harder when they felt like they mattered. One evening, as Daniel sat in his office reviewing the final implementation plans for the company-wide changes, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Jake. "Jake, hey, I just wanted to say thank you. I still don't know how all of this happened, but I appreciate it. Not just the promotion, but everything. People actually feel like they're part of something now. It means a lot." Daniel smiled as he typed a response. Daniel: "No, Jake. Thank you. You reminded me what this company was supposed to be about. I will not forget it again." Jake's response came almost immediately. "Jake, if you ever need another undercover assignment, just let me know." Daniel chuckled. "Daniel, I think I will stick to my day job, but I might stop by sometime, without the disguise." Placing his phone on his desk, Daniel leaned back in his chair. The world of business had always taught him that leaders were supposed to focus on the big picture. But sometimes, the biggest lessons came from the smallest moments. He had gone undercover expecting to find inefficiencies. Instead, he had found a young man whose quiet acts of kindness had transformed lives without anyone noticing. And now, because of Jake, Reedmart would never be the same again. 1 year later. 12 months had passed since Daniel's undercover visit to store number 32. What had started as a simple experiment had turned into something much bigger. Reedmart had gained national attention for its employee-first leadership model, something that had become increasingly rare in the corporate world. Articles were written about how a convenience store chain had redefined workplace culture, how they had made kindness part of their company mission, and how one CEO had gone undercover and changed everything. Employee satisfaction had skyrocketed. Retention rates improved. Customers noticed the shift, too, often commenting that they had never seen employees so engaged and genuinely happy to be at work. And at the heart of it all was Jake. His promotion to assistant manager had been just the beginning. Within months, his reputation as a leader, mentor, and problem solver had spread beyond his store. Other managers sought his advice. Employees looked up to him. Customers remembered his name. One afternoon, Daniel made an unannounced visit to store number 32, not as a temp worker, not in disguise, but as himself. He walked through the automatic doors and immediately noticed the difference. The atmosphere was welcoming, warm, and full of energy. Employees smiled as they stocked shelves, customers chatted with cashiers, and the entire store seemed to hum with life. Then he saw Jake. He was standing by the front, helping an elderly woman bag her groceries. He laughed at something she said, nodding as if they had known each other for years. His sleeves were rolled up, and despite being an assistant manager now, he was still doing the work, still helping, still leading by example. Daniel approached with a smirk. "Still making the rest of us look bad, I see." Jake turned at the familiar voice and grinned. "I try." They shook hands, something that felt less like a formality and more like a shared understanding. Daniel gestured around the store. "It looks different." Jake nodded. "It feels different. People actually like coming to work now." He smiled. "I guess that means the boss is doing something right." Daniel exhaled. The boss learned that the best lessons do not come from a corporate office. He glanced around. "So, how is the kindness fund working?" Jake grinned. "It is amazing. Employees use it almost every day. People who come in struggling leave with a little hope. It is nice, you know. Seeing small things make a big difference." Daniel nodded. "I am glad we did it." As he turned to leave, Jake called after him. "Hey, Daniel?" He stopped and turned back. Jake hesitated for a second before saying, "What made you do it? Why did you really come here that day?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Because I was losing sight of what mattered," he admitted. "I thought running a business was just about growth and numbers. But I had forgotten that businesses are only as strong as the people who run them." Jake nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. Daniel took one last glance around the store before smiling. "Keep up the good work, Jake." As he stepped out of the store, he realized something. He had come undercover looking for answers, but he had found something far greater. He had found purpose again, and as long as he was leading Reedmart, he would never lose sight of that again. Because at the end of the day, success was not just about sales, expansion, or profit. Success was about people. As Daniel walked out of the store, he felt something he had not felt in years, a deep sense of fulfillment. He had spent his career building Reedmart into a retail giant, expanding its reach and increasing its profits. But it had taken one undercover trip to truly understand the soul of his business. The heart of Reedmart was not in corporate policies, profit margins, or expansion strategies. It was in the small acts of kindness that happened inside the stores every single day. It was in the way Jake had quietly helped customers, in the way employees felt valued when given the right support, and in the way customers felt seen, rather than just another transaction. As he reached his car, he heard the automatic doors slide open behind him. "Hey, Daniel." He turned to see Jake jogging toward him, looking slightly out of breath. "You forgot something," Jake said, holding up a Reedmart name tag, the one Daniel had used while undercover. "Figured you might want a souvenir." Daniel chuckled, taking the name tag from him. He ran his thumb over the plastic, remembering everything he had learned in just a few days. "Thanks," he said, slipping it into his pocket. "This might just be the most valuable thing I own." Jake smirked. "So, does this mean you're planning another undercover mission anytime soon?" Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "I think I'll leave that to you. Besides, now that you're a manager, I expect you to keep an eye on things for me." Jake grinned. "No problem, boss, but next time you come in, you're stocking shelves." Daniel playfully rolled his eyes. "Deal." As Jake turned to head back inside, Daniel lingered for a moment, watching as the young man disappeared through the doors. He knew that Jake's story was just beginning, and he could not wait to see where it would take him. Sliding into his car, Daniel took out his phone and opened a new email draft. Subject: New Employee Initiative. To Corporate Leadership Team. I want every store to know the name Jake. His actions reminded me of what this company was meant to be, and from now on, we are making sure that employees like him are never overlooked again. Starting immediately, we are implementing a leadership development program designed to promote employees who embody our core values. The first scholarship recipient will be Jake. I want him trained, mentored, and given every opportunity to succeed. And I want every store to know, kindness will be rewarded. No more getting lost in the system. No more quiet heroes being ignored. From this moment forward, we are making Reedmart a company that truly values its people. This is just the beginning. Daniel hit send, feeling a sense of purpose that he had not felt in years. The journey that had started with a simple disguise had ended with something far more valuable. It had changed the way he saw his company, his employees, and himself, and for the first time in a long time, he was not just proud of what he had built. He was excited about where it was going next. If this story inspired you, hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us what truly matters. And share this with someone who believes in the power of kindness, because real leadership starts with seeing and valuing the people around us.